Welcome back. This is the Northern Miner Podcast, and I am your host, Matthew Keeble, and guess who's back?
Guess who's back? It's Lesley Stokes. Hold on to your chairs.
There you go. Yeah,
Do not fall off.
Lesley's returned from her well-earned vacation. Where were you? Up
Northern Vancouver Island. I went on a kayak trip with my dad.
Nice.
And it rained for the most of it.
Yeah, it's been a little West Coast weathery recently, so that's
August.
yeah. Did you see any whales or anything?
Yeah, not as many this year.
No,
but we definitely saw a bunch of orcas on the beach, sitting back, having a little bit of box wine and watching the whales.
Box wine, nice.
That's what you do when you go camping.
Travels well. Yeah, travels well. Yeah. So this is the Northern Miner Podcast, and as most weeks, we're brought to you by the Yukon Mining Alliance, our sponsor. So thanks to them again. And yeah, so now we're actually back in studio. It's been sort of a whirlwind the last couple months. It's been so busy. Mm-hmm. Markets have been back. We've both been traveling, so we're doing sort of a back to basics podcast, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. No guests and no not in a coffee shop as we were last week. So it's more traditional. Let's say we're back to our roots. So before we get into it, we have a few fun things this week. Lesley's going to get into. Is it Ontario geology?
The geology of Ontario. I was back to being a geo nerd again.
There we go. We got a little bit of a geology corner this week, which is always fun. Yeah. We'll talk about markets a little bit. Things I'm gonna spoiler alert. Things are pretty flat. Gold's dipped a little bit. We'll get into that in a moment. I want to talk a little bit about Lundin Mining and Tenke, because we were just talking about Freeport. And they extended their right of first offer on Tenke, so there's something going on over there. They're trying to decide what they're going to do with their share of that asset. Right, so we'll talk about that a little bit. I've heard some buzzing. I jumped on, do you know Altius, the royalty company out of Newfoundland, actually?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, I jumped on their first ever conference call. They'd never done a quarterly conference call before. It was pretty funny. And they're kind of joining the chorus of people that say the bear market's over, and they're really looking at exploration properties and think that there's going to be a big upside in exploration. So we'll talk about that a little bit. But before we do get into that, I'll just quickly run through metal prices as we do every week. Gold took a bit of a dip. When I say a bit of a dip, it's still at 1320. Yeah. It's at 1317.80. So it's like we've been talking the last month or so how range bound it is, between about 1330 and 1310. It hasn't moved at all. And then same with silver is at $19. It's bounced between 18 and 19. Copper actually had a good run this week. I noticed that yesterday. It's at 216. So we're up a little bit. Oil's at $44.48 a barrel WTI. So yeah, it's every time I do this now, I was saying this last week, I'm just I could just take the podcast I recorded last week and run the macro.
Just insert it.
Yeah,
it really has.
The metal prices are here. The Fed said this, and nothing happened.
Groundhog Day.
Yeah. And as far as equities are concerned, they were actually up a little bit today despite the dip in the gold price. So most equities are doing fairly well right now. But everything seems to be in a holding pattern. And we talked about last week. I've had Mickey Fulp on, Mercenary Geologist, and then I had Joe Mazunder on from Exploration Insights. And both of them said to watch out for the Canadian listed stocks because everything looks to be overvalued.
Yeah.
So it's interesting if we're going to get an equity correction. They haven't. Gold, especially precious metal equities, though gold has dipped a bit, haven't moved. I think they actually went up today when it went down. So it's interesting to see kind of the market activity we're seeing right now. And then we mentioned last week that there is the next federal sort of reserve meetings on the 21st. So that's when we'll know. They'll make another comment on interest rates, which they will not hike. Don't quote me on that, but I'm fairly confident they will not be hiking them.
Matt, you just moved the stock market.
Yeah. Hey, we had huge traffic last week. We just might.
Gold just went
down. Yeah. So yeah, but let's because it's just been all finance all the time for the last 3 weeks maybe, with me just prattling on. But so let's do some geology because we haven't had a geology corner in a while.
Geology corner.
So the region of interest this week is Ontario.
Is Ontario, yeah.
So yeah, let's let Lesley kick off with a little geology corner here.
I was really excited to start this article because all I was thinking in my head was this image of Star Trek Next Generation, the final episode.
I don't remember.
When Q takes Picard back to the Precambrian, into the Archean, and shows him what the world looked like. And anyway, so that's a flash in my head when I was writing this article, because that's pretty much what the history of Ontario is you have to kind of go back in time to a point when the Earth was just covered by oceans and it was this hostile, crazy alien place where the crust was just beginning to form and raft up on these volcanic islands.
I want to interrupt briefly here on a Star Trek related. Like, I'm not a Trekkie by any means.
Well, you should be.
I'm more of a Star Wars guy.
Oh, God.
But isn't that sort of stealing that old Star Trek movie where Captain Kirk goes back in time to save the whales or something? Isn't that one of the ones where they have to, like, or am I thinking of Superman? Because there's also a Superman where he saves whales. But anyway, that seems like they're recycling plot material, I think. Because William Shatner had already done that, though I do prefer Patrick Stewart because that guy's ace. But anyway,
he's amazing.
Yeah.
Right? And Q, oh God, I love that character.
They're all on Netflix now, by the way. Every single Star Wars or
and
Star Trek.
Star Trek,
yeah, going all the way back, so you can refresh on your, what is the other one, Deep Space Nine.
Check it out, everyone.
Yeah. We're now
Netflix
promoting free promotion for Netflix.
For Netflix.
Yeah. So anyways, back to rocks.
Yeah, that's kind of what the beginning of Ontario was like, and I think it's really important because most of the gold from the greenstone belts there were formed during that period of time in Earth's history. So you're thinking about really small rafts of volcanic terrain that was colliding and basically like just car wrecking into this continent that forms the Abitibi and the Red Lake greenstone belts, and you name it. And all the gold is kind of trapped up in that.
So I'll ask the question that maybe someone who doesn't know very much about mining or geology might ask. You hear about greenstone belts all the time.
Yes.
And they're everywhere, like South America. This is all related to Pangea we've talked about, right? But maybe a little bit of color on what constitutes a greenstone belt, like what and why you see them in like British Guyana in South America, and in Burkina Faso and Ivory Coast, and in Ontario, right?
Yeah,
in Red Lake.
well, I mean, again, it goes way back beyond even Pangea, like even earlier into the Earth's history. So it basically represents really old chunks of rock, some of the Earth's original crust that has been like mashed together and taken apart, and today is kind of like scattered, I guess, across the world in some of these prominent greenstone belts that we see in West Africa and Ontario, even up in Northwest Territories, none of it. And so what constitutes a greenstone belt is exactly what I said. You have these volcanic chains that smashed into each other and accreted, right? So you have all these big like structural like accretionary zones, and then you have mountain building, which increases the pressures and temperatures, which bakes the rock, and that turns it into like, green chloride.
That's where you see the color.
That's where you get like the color, and that's why they call it that greenstone belt. And of course, these are old, and there was just so much gold plummeting up during the Archean and Paleoproterozoic. It was insane. Like, there was just so much gold. The crust was way warmer than we see today. There was a lot much more metal kicking around.
More malleable, right?
Well, no, I don't know if it was that, but like, So warmer crust, so it's a little bit more ductile. So you see a lot of the myelinitic shear zones, and then the crust building, and then that breaks, and all the gold comes like plumping up. So it's just this really cool period of time in Earth's history when there was so much metal forming, and there was so much kind of happening, and the crust was kind of coming together. So, and that basically forms like a large chunk of Ontario. Yeah. And the cool thing too is you always get VMS in there too. Like
you do,
extraordinary VMS deposits.
Yeah.
So whether or not these fluids interacted with these pre-existing VMS deposits in the greenstone belt, I mean, I don't know. If you find a really prominent VMS deposit, then I'd have to kind of start thinking to myself, well, is there a really prominent gold deposit nearby too? So anyway, that's the vast majority of Ontario, but check out the article because I kind of go into the other little parts.
There's some cool diagrams I saw. I took a look. There's some really nice like technical pictures,
drawings and pictures. Yeah, and it also too gives you a highlight of what the advanced mineral projects are and
why don't
what's
you give us a
active
sample
and
of
stuff.
that?
Oh gosh, I can just go on. Just
Yeah.
go to the article and look
Because
at
there's
it. There's so
I was
many.
gonna say that there's, with the rise in gold prices and stuff, there's sort of been a resurgence in exploration activity, both in
Especially in
Ontario and
gold.
Quebec. Yeah, and I mean, people going back to the old Timmins and Kirkland Lake camps, and this is in Ontario, but in terms of Quebec, we talked about that West Dome Kiena discovery at the Brownfield site, and
Totally.
there's just a lot of really interesting stuff going on out there, and we've seen a few mergers and acquisitions out that way too. I mean, in terms of Timmins and looking at the camps out there. So there's it's always interesting, and I know was it you who's looking at Prosper Gold? That's doing we recently did an article on Prosper Gold. That's Pete Bernier's company. They were previously looking at copper up in the Chesley, but they've switched their attention over to gold in Ontario as well. So
cool.
it's
Good place to be.
yeah, it's popular and you can raise money over there, so it's always good. And yeah, so the one other thing I did want to talk about, and this is like we never talk about, and
What is that?
it's metallurgical coal.
Oh.
And our editor-in-chief, John Cumming, did a little bit of an editorial on this. And this is sort of, I have to say, I didn't hear a lot about well, we went to the coal conference, in July?
Yeah.
And it wasn't
earlier.
the most, like,
It was
positive
so-
event. Like, people were like, it's so tough. But then, all of a sudden, metallurgical coal has gone bonkers. Teck Resources' stock has gone way up because
few dollars, I think.
they've got a lot of exposure to met coal, and so it was like you can head over to the website and check out John's article on this. But I wanted to touch on it a little bit. This is pretty much all driven by China, as we know. Chinese, there's a bunch of restocking going on at non-Chinese mills. China has been doing closing mines essentially, and doing infecting supply. And it's funny how I was having a conversation with somebody, and nobody sees this stuff coming, right? And it's funny because China controls such a huge population and has a fairly I don't know how you describe their government these days, like a centralist oligopoly of some kind. But giant communists. But they can just flick switches and do things with commodities, and all of a sudden, I think you'd be hard pressed to go back, let's say 6 months, and find anyone that was invest in metallurgical coal, but all of a sudden flip a switch on Chinese supply or Chinese demand, and all of a sudden the commodity goes way up, right? So it's pretty interesting. It just shocked me. And so John did a really cool article. I wanted to touch on that a little bit. The other thing that we were going to talk about this week is that Arizona Mining has. I'm familiar with this project as well. And
yeah.
Did you just talk to Jim?
Yeah, I was talking to Jim and
Gowans,
Don as well.
And Don,
Don Taylor.
He's like the geology master
COO,
down there.
Yeah, he's the brainchild. The
And
Taylor
so this
deposit.
is so I always tell people this is the story that I'm like, you should read my stuff early because this is what happens. But this
True.
Yeah.
You know what, Matt? You do call it all the time.
Yeah.
I gotta
But
say.
I'm like, when I first touched base with the guys at Arizona, it's Richard Wark who did Augusta Resources and now is working on Newcastle Gold as well. But it was early when they were starting to first name Jim Gowans, who was the ex-co-president of Barrick. Well, that's when they tried that whole two-president thing. That lasted 2 weeks. But I touched base with them, like, God, I can't even remember when this was. But their stock is at 70 cents, and I was like, this seems like people should be buying the heck out of this thing. And now, what is it at now? It's at $2.40 or somewhere around there. It's pretty high. So it's but that's because they've benefited because zinc prices. We talked about the recovery in zinc that looks sustainable over $1 now, and B, it looks really good.
Yeah.
The drill holes they've been releasing over, let's say, the last 2 months.
Oh, the last one that they just did,
Yeah.
there was that 1,300-foot step out from that resource boundary.
And what was do you have the grade on it?
Yeah, dude, it was 24.5 feet. How much, 7 meters or something?
Yeah.
23% zinc, 13% lead, 7.3 ounces per ton.
Wow.
400-meter step out from.
Obviously, American company as they
deposit.
report all.
Yeah,
the,
I know.
Yeah.
It's really. It's like
Feet
I'm
and
reading up this
ounces,
article right
yeah.
now. I'm like, oh gosh.
Yeah, converting.
Yeah.
So, did you get into? Do you want to dig a little bit into the geology of Taylor? Did you get into that with them a little bit, or?
I kind of did, but I need to go through. I always go
Is
through
it
the tech
Manto
reports.
or is it?
It's a carbonate replacement deposit.
Okay.
And then
okay.
there's some skarn kicking around too. And
Okay.
I think that's more of a function of the alteration rocks or minerals.
Yeah.
And so they said that the step out hole, there's some skarn there,
Okay.
which means that they might be coming close to like that intrusive body that's basically bleeding out all these metals into this carbonate rock.
Yeah.
So, but at the same token, it's that there's these old Arsarco drill holes. That's
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
another
I remember
600
that.
meters
Yeah,
farther, like from that 400 meter step out.
Mm-hmm.
That's also has similar grades and thicknesses.
Yeah, it's crazy
so,
looking.
I mean,
It's crazy looking.
yeah, it's
Like,
not
yeah.
only is there a northwest extension component to that deposit, but there's also blue sky potential to fatten it up too along the other direction.
And the interesting thing is, it is a historic mine site. Like there was a mine there. Like
Yeah.
it's brownfield, and there's some of it's on patented claims. Right?
Yeah.
Which means that they don't. It's way easier to permit than non-patented mining claims because it's not necessarily as onerous
Yeah.
to get the permits done. So when I talked to them, this was early days. Obviously, they were discussing how they were going to get the footprint aligned to build.
And it's funny because
Yeah.
it's just like falls totally in place because
Yeah.
their patented ground extends northwest of
Yeah,
the deposit.
exactly.
So it's just like they're just riding the pony in that. But
Yeah, that's a banging looking thing. Like
yeah, it's pretty cool. It's,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
cool to see what is going to come out. So there's a lot of potential there, and they're basically hammering out the meters.
Mhm.
And they've just jacked up the program even more. So they're going to be drilling all the way to the end of this year because the guys are saying that they're fast tracking to get as much drilling done before they come out with their resource update, which is going to go into their PEA. So they're trying to get as much, like, you know, like mineralization.
Yeah, exactly.
Much
Yeah, yeah,
resource
yeah.
in there as possible.
as many pierce points as they can.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. Like going back to I was on the Altius conference call, and they were like, yeah, zinc carbonate replacement deposits, but they're looking for them in Ireland, which is it's kind of cool. Like they have a huge land package in Ireland, and they're looking for zinc. But that goes back to we're starting to see people sort of
Do the zinc game.
also copper too. Like there's a little bit of investment dollars chipping around at the edges of copper, and that's where I, some sort of speculator, I'd be looking at some good copper deals because I think it was Mickey Fulp who told us that he was looking sort of for any sort of promising looking copper deposits because, I mean, we all suspect that $2.16 a pound isn't sustainable based on what the margins of producing a pound of copper. Like it seems like, and the declining grades and lack of discoveries, it seems like if you were a betting man or woman, that copper might be a good mid to longer term bet. And speaking of which, we'll get in. I wanted to touch a bit on this Lundin Mining's and Freeport and Tenke and China Moly, who's buying Freeport's stake. As we know, we've covered this pretty much in depthly. But one of the interesting things is that we always talk about this because Lundin Mining, like, they don't want to be there anymore. They don't want to be like a minority shareholder in the DRC run by China Moly. Like, can you imagine the risk profile on that? They're like, no, this is not. That sounded like a trumpet, probably. My apologies. But anyways, so Lundin has got another extension, and what they have is a right of first offer. So that if they wanted, they could hypothetically go out and find a big partner and match China Moly's offer and buy all of Tenke. Now, I nobody seems to think Lundin Mining will do that because it's sort of, well, the risk profile they don't want, and B, I don't think they ever intended to run that themselves. Like they needed a big, capable block cave kind of mining operator like Freeport. So I don't know if they were like relatively caught aback when Freeport bailed to monetize assets. We saw them monetize all their oil. What was it, last week? A lot of their oil assets too. So Lundin has got they've extended that period where they can sort of weigh their options here with Tenke in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So I've been watching this because I'm quite interested to see what they do because there's a few options for them. They could stay and just allow China Moly to become operator and hold their interest and continue to attempt to profit from the mine. They could negotiate the rest of the sale to China Moly or another interest. Like from my opinion, the only person who would take that stake is another Chinese company. Like, I don't see a Western mining company coming in and be like, oh, sure, we'll work with China Moly on this giant project. Like,
Yeah.
I just like, it very rarely happens. Like, it happens with some of the big Japanese companies like Sumitomo and Mitsui and stuff, but you rarely see it happen between the Chinese and North American companies. So they're probably, what they're doing, I would imagine, is trying to realize as much value as they can from the sale of their stake, right? So this is just something I have been watching. So everybody, I just find it interesting. I'm like, what are they going to do? Like, because they don't want to, like, lose a bunch of money, right? Like, obviously their stake is worth something, and selling it for less than the perceived value would be really bad, even though they're cutting their geopolitical risk profile. So I would love to be a fly on the wall in those negotiations, like with Lundin Mining, like, oh gosh, what should we do with this thing? This is oh god. But a lot of analysts are like, once they extradite themselves with profit from the Tenke situation, Lundin Mining has one of the best geopolitical risk profiles for base metal producers. Like, all their mines will be in pretty good jurisdictions once this is resolved, right. Which is probably, I would imagine, quite a substantial headache for everybody. And then I got this, John Cumming, our editor chief, sent, you probably got this email on the Yukon as well. So we love our sponsor, the Yukon Mining Alliance, but this is not great news. But we've talked about this previously. This is something I've sort of harped on. But the Conference Board of Canada dropped a bit of a bomb, and what they essentially said was, of all the provinces and territories, Yukon's economy is facing the bleakest near-term outlook. And they cite, obviously, we talked about a lot about how Capstone's intending to close the Minto mine. Alexco is struggling to restart their operations at the Belkino. But I will touch on this briefly, the Alexco thing, because people are like, well, silver prices are $20. And they said, what silver prices were $20, they'd restart the mine. Plus, they had some banging intercepts at their Birmingham discovery. But they also have a silver stream with Silver Wheaton that's a little bit of a pain in the butt. Right. And they're almost going to have to renegotiate that to restart operations, in my opinion, at sub $25 silver. But I have a site visit coming up. We'll get into all that. But anyway, so this report came out just sort of, citing Alexco's not in operation. Obviously, Yukon Zinc, Wolverine Mine was closed down last year. So the board expects the Yukon's GDP to show growth of about 3.6% in 2016, but then contract significantly, dropping by about 10% over the next 2 years. 7.7% in 2017 and a further 3.1% in 2018. And so they were like, obviously, like, and they said some of the reasons for optimism was Goldcorp just bought Kaminak, and Victoria's Dublin Gulch is sort of creeping towards production, like, very slowly. I have to actually write that up too. They put out their new feasibility study last week. I got to write that up as well. Meanwhile, as we know, there is also an election coming up in the Yukon. So this probably couldn't have been timed any worse, the Yukon party, like the incumbent party in the Yukon, because they're like, oh no. And so, like, clearly, like, the premier came out and said it just illustrates how important resources are to the territory. And then, obviously, the opposition parties, the NDP and the Liberals, came out and were like, you've totally mismanaged the economy, because that's what politicians do. They just make super sweeping statements about each other, like, you're terrible, no, you're the worst, I don't like you. So they came out and they were arguing in the media about what this meant for the Yukon. But it'll be interesting. I mean, as we know, and something the conference board may miss, there's definitely more exploration going on up there right now.
For sure.
And you know, all it takes is one significant discovery. We know Western Copper and Gold is taking their Casino deposit through permitting right now, so that's another one the conference board mentioned as a possible upside in the future. Yeah, so that was, John sort of forwarded that to me and said, we should mention this. And I'm like, okay, and he's going to do an editorial on it, maybe. Cool. So that's sort of our Yukon Minute. A little bit of a mixed one. It's the conference board kind of dropped a bomb, but there's reasons for optimism. So there you go. Yeah, so what to look forward to next week. We have our Southwest U.S. special coming out, I believe. That's right. And that will include your Arizona mining piece. We've got something on Klondex coming out, I believe, and a few other companies down in that part of the United States. So that'll be a nice little insert we have coming up. I'm hoping to get my Victoria Gold Dublin Gold site visit out next week. Sweet. So we'll talk about that a little bit. As always, we're looking into some more audio interviews because those things are just banging popular.
Cool.
So we're looking to get some analysts on, maybe from BMO. We're looking to get some people from the investment community on, so we'll see if we can get some brokers or money movers on just to talk a little bit about commodities. And I do want to remind everyone, all our listeners, we do have Skype capabilities now. So I had Mickey actually Skyped in from Albuquerque the other week.
Fun.
So we have the ability, and it actually sounds, I was shocked
Yeah.
with how good the audio is on it. So good job, Skype. I've heard mixed things. Like sometimes it's really good, and then sometimes your call will drop and it'll just like brutal. But yeah, so that pretty much wraps up our show. This is we're back to our more traditional format for now. Things are always fluid. But yeah, so I'd like to thank you guys thank everyone for listening. And this has been Matthew Keeble.
And Lesley Stokes.
And we'll talk to you next week.
Ciao, ciao.